Hi everybody, good morning. I'm Sara Turnbull from Workwild, who are a social enterprise that specialise in sustainable placemaking. And that is our theme tune. I'll have that every moment I mention my name. That would be great. Some of the things that we've worked on, because we're about sustainable places, culture is a massive part of what we think of in terms of sustainability. And so we've helped the Mayor of London recently launch the World Cities Culture Forum as a standalone charity. It's a 10-year project that's now spun out with its own business model. We've helped the Creative Estuary. Anybody from the Creative Estuary in the house? We helped the Creative Estuary deliver their thinking on affordable workspace, which is really focused around how we mentor people through the difficult ache that it is to get capital projects off the ground, and we'll be talking a bit more about that later. And we've helped Margate Creative Land Trust to secure their business model and put their governance in place. So that's kind of who I am and why I'm here. And I'm just going to ask the panellists to introduce themselves.
Okay.
Starting with you, David.
Is this working, yeah? Yeah, I'll go first. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Worcester. My name's David Blake. I'm Managing Director here at the City Council. I'm a last-minute stand-in, actually. Shane, our Corporate Director, who does all of the work, is snowed in. His hill is a little larger than Adrian's, I'm afraid. I've managed to rejuggle my diary slightly and join you. I suppose really a couple of things. I was told I'd got 3 minutes. Most of you who know me will know that 3 minutes is just an impossible target for me.
Oh, I forgot to mention my nickname's the Time Lord.
Right, okay. Well, I'll crack on. I'll just go very quickly then and say that for me it was really interesting. I remember we had a guy that was working for us on a temporary basis, and we were walking down the high street and we looked at the chicken shop, and he said to me, "You know what? If we could knock that down, we could open up the route down through the arches." And as Adrian has said, the arches have been an ambition for us for a very long time. I said to him, "Don't be so bloody stupid. You know, we don't own the chicken shop, and how are we going to do that anyway?" And really, the opportunity of the Cultural Development Fund really just turned that daft 2-minute conversation into reality. I didn't expect us to really have an opportunity to do it, and that opportunity was given, and we've made the most of it. No doubt I'll come on to other things later, but so I've probably had more than my 3 minutes already. So thank you very much.
No, you've been very well
welcome to Worcester. Thank you.
Yeah. I've got to say, just from being around last night, it feels like Worcester is just full of young, creative, independent businesses. There's
lots of us young, creative people about.
You've got to lead from the front with
I had a fringe when this project started.
Amazing. Thank you very much, David. And Lindsey, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to come to Worcester. I have to say I've never been before, so I'm definitely coming back. So I'm Lindsey. I'm from the Real Ideas organisation based in Plymouth, and the slides you're seeing are the sort of the market hall. I'm here slightly on false pretences because actually our CDF didn't include any capital money. The capital money for the market hall was raised from, well, what you could politely call a portfolio of funding sources. I think it was a jumble sale, really. But anyway, it has happened. So what our CDF was all about was revenue money in order to actually allow the development of the business model that Sara is talking about. So I'm really happy to talk about a bit more of that later on. In terms of us as an organisation, we're a social enterprise. We've been going for about 16 years. And as our name suggests, we're interested in working with people, with communities to have good ideas and then put them into practice. And so we sort of basically do 3 things. We do lots of work with young people, particularly young people who've been struggling. Of course, if you're going to do that, you need to then work with the communities in order to actually start to change the sort of infrastructure and the circumstances surrounding them. And so that pretty naturally leads you into physical regeneration. And we've sort of ended up as an organisation with a slightly nasty habit of taking on listed buildings. So we now have 4. The last one is actually another building which is being converted. So this was our 3rd. So we have lots of scars, I guess, to bear from that process. But I sort of, and I hope this doesn't sound sort of horrible, I actually end up thinking that the capital bit is easier than the rest. And so that's the bit I suppose I'm really interested in, is how do we not just create the spaces to enable amazing things to happen, but create spaces which really start to change the sort of economic makeup. And so the Market Hall, the thing that we put into that, which was different, was a first in Europe facility, which is the Immersive Dome. That's what you can sort of see a little bit of there. It's a bit hard to imagine because it's a 360, 15-metre diameter environment. But the reason we did that was to create a facility which was going to be unique, not just nationally, but internationally, in order to make sure that we could reach and bring to Plymouth people who were world leading in their field. And so for me, the sort of, the best moments are when we have, some sort of extraordinary immersive artist in the building, and we also have a bunch of 7-year-olds who are busy making 360 films. It's really exciting. It's still a long way to go, but it is working, and that's, super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that being able to pick up on making the vision real, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But then maybe we can talk a bit more about the spreadsheet warriors who are behind every great project that carries on living after its opening moment. Because I think it is that business model and that approach to bringing people together that makes things work very well. So next up, Ben, you okay to jump in and introduce yourself?
No problem. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. So I manage the culture service at Wakefield Council. So we're responsible for the overall management of the CDF programme in Wakefield. I couldn't be here last night, unfortunately, but the main thing that stuck in my head that I need to do at lunchtime is go out and visit the chicken shop that I keep hearing about. So make sure
It's closed.
Is it? Oh, devastated. That was on my list number one. But in terms of Wakefield's programme, sorry. Wakefield's programme has got two key elements really in terms of the capital side of the CDF programme. We are carrying out a transformational project in the city centre in Wakefield, which is carrying on the theme of market halls, transforming a former market hall in the city. A relatively new build back in 2008 that unfortunately didn't work out as a market site, was subject to a potential commercial development that didn't come off for commercial reasons. And as we were carrying out a site analysis for essentially a mixed-use space in the city to try and create a creative cluster, something that gave a place for creative businesses to call home, a place where we could carry out skills and business support activity, but also a showcase space. What the city lacks really is good quality event space. We struggle for outdoor event space, and there is nothing in terms of indoor event space. And the former market hall ticked all those boxes. And what CDF's been really great for us on is the balance of revenue and capital for us that we received has allowed us to programme activity at the site. One of the key things is obviously bringing communities along with you. And the market hall the former market hall had this obviously negative connotation in terms of what it previously was. When you told someone we're going to turn it into a creative hub, they'd blankly stare at you. Actually being able to show people what that might look like with programming was really transformational, and our community has been brilliant at engaging with those pop-up offers we've been able to put into the site over that time period. The other element, and I'm sure we'll sort of touch on that as we carry on the discussion, the other element of our capital programme is some really exciting investments into Production Park down in the southeast of our district, in South Kirkby, and it's an existing site built around the live events industry. Really interesting mix of different businesses all on the same campus. A Backstage Academy, which is an academic arm to that, looking at students coming through the live events arena. And we've been able to support through the CDF programme a managed workspace, so those students that are learning skills of a place to stay and grow and develop their own businesses on the site, but also a really exciting research and innovation centre that is predominantly around the live events industry, but is so much more in terms of the wider creative agenda. So something that was already there as a creative cluster, being able to inject that resource and that drive for it to move to the next level has been really important for us.
Yeah, that's really fantastic, isn't it? And I think particularly when we talk about their easy capital projects, there's sort of two moments where they're not easy. One is the gathering the money bit, and then the second bit is the waiting for it to happen bit. And I'm quite an impatient person, and I'm quite typical of the general public, that by the time you've mentioned it, that you're collecting the money, I already want it delivered. Mm-hmm. So I think that idea of having revenue alongside to allow you to be delivering while you're waiting to deliver the big thing does help bring people along with you, and that's really fantastic to hear. Maybe we dig into a bit more of what made that happen. And I think if it's okay, we'll jump across to you, Annabel. You can let us know a little bit about some of what you've been delivering in Grimsby.
Sure. I suppose I'm an imposter. Good morning. I'm an artist. One of those things. Yes, it's quite thrilling to be here, actually, and thanks to all of you. You know, I get to spend your funding on things that hopefully make some sort of difference. But I suppose it's kind of a beautiful thing to be able to make a piece of work for your hometown, because I studied in Grimsby, I'm from there, but I ran away to Plymouth because it was a really long way away, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to get out of Grimsby and I'm going to study at the College of Art there. But I eventually kind of went back, and for me it was just a wonderful invitation to have this opportunity to almost reinvent myself as a public artist during the pandemic and make a massive piece of public art in Grimsby that had mass and sort of meaningful participation. I normally make really miserable dystopian works of art, so this was a huge departure to make something feel good and inclusive, and it almost, you know, it nearly killed me, this process, but ultimately I really hope it was worth it. And there's a few pictures on screen. It's all about me, not really, no. It's just wonderful. So what I wanted to do is get as many participants as possible. We had, I think it's 450 members of the public came along and wanted to be a part of a piece of public artwork, because my thing is, what an imposition if you just plonk something in the middle of a town. I think we'll want to talk later about how it's just good to get in there right at the beginning of that process. Otherwise it's almost like this, here's a piece of public art and it's good for you. And that's like a really weird way. So I just got everybody was involved. They came, they pulled a shape, and they wanted to be part of something. I was terrified maybe, you know, people didn't turn up, and I wanted them all to be precious. So each and every individual in the murmuration, that I call it, is a member of our Grimsby community. We've even got the town hall cat, RIP, who died in a terrible incident. And it's that idea of a kind of democratisation of space, that everybody is precious, everybody is important, and kind of going with that beautiful kind of patina as things age. And it's just a lovely thing now that we're actually seeing toddlers who are growing up and they can actually identify themselves in that murmuration. So that was great. And it's the gift that keeps on giving, because I met this fella, Adrian Riley, who made the wonderful pathway in Grimsby. And believe it or not, during the pandemic, we teamed up. I say I'm miserable, I lurk in a studio. But I started working with Adrian, and we got 4 public art commissions on the back of the work in Grimsby. During the pandemic, we were redesigning town centres, we were making huge sort of linear pieces of work. So it's just been the most remarkable opportunities to sort of sustain myself again as a full-time artist, and to, you know, to kind of go with that. And again, it's that democratisation of public space. And we made a different iteration of the work here. So we took 2 kind of almost solid artworks, a stone poem that stretched the whole distance of the square, the murmuration, and we were able to liaise with different artists and make a machine learning version of that, which is based on, excuse me, artificial intelligence, working with tech designers, but again, that democratisation of letting people in on the secret, how it works, they can participate with that. There's a huge, big linear piece of work we made called the migrating zoetrope, which animates as you move along it. And this was all really on the back of that confidence of getting that, yes, you can do this in Grimsby. And then, you know, you can take the girl or the artist out of Grimsby. And what amused me, the British Council flew me out to Brazil in June. I made a piece of work for 4 million people at the biggest pride parade in the world. And all the publicity material they used was from Grimsby. And I ended up staying on Wolf Haddock Street. So I just thought that was like this really kind of nice, kind of cyclical way of working with that. But really, for me, it's just this enormous thank you to DCMS, to Arts Council, to Grimsby Creates, and most of all, really, the people of Grimsby for kind of going along with this journey and being kind of confident and wanting to be part of a piece of contemporary art, which normally horrifies people.
We've got so much knowledge on this panel. I want to just huddle up and just pick their brains the next 2 hours, but that isn't the way the day's going to go. So
that's after last night's party,
yeah,
you know.
Exactly. So I think if we can find the roving mic for people in the audience so people can start asking questions, and you can all start giving me meaningful eye contact or even like hand waves. And while you're nervous, I can ask my own questions just to, well, because I really want to. I want to get under the skin of some of these things. So I think what we've heard is about it's having a big vision. It's having the space that's latent, that's ready to be brought to life, and then it's having the skill to bring people and funding together to get something going. That's that sort of journey that these 4 cities share. What are your top tips, Lindsey? Because it's not the first one you've done, right?
No. Oh dear, that's always one of those, isn't it? So, I mean, I think the thing for our CDF project in Plymouth was what we were really keen to do was to create a creative ecology. And that was that sort of sense that, I suppose, isn't it? It's like, if you plant the right seeds, then you get to the point where actually sort of the forest grows and is self-replenishing. Yeah. So it was trying to work out how could we create the conditions that would sort of allow that to happen, recognising that the money is going to flow in different ways, but at the end of the day, we have to find it's good old social enterprise principles. We have to find a way of not just relying on large lumps, very welcome large lumps, but large lumps of public money. And so I suppose top tips are be bold about what you do with spaces. So the first building we did, which is, they're all listed, it's a mad idea as to why we think this is a good idea, but anyway, and the first one we sort of developed really as I suppose we've called a social enterprise centre, which has been brilliant, but essentially what we learnt from that was that if you have a range of local community projects, that's absolutely fantastic and it's really important for that community. But in brutal terms, you are actually recycling not very much money. And so that becomes a real problem if you're trying to create step change in terms of the economy. And so when it came to Market Hall, we were very clear that what we needed to do was something which I suppose was quite disruptive. Yeah. And so, we were just sort of offered the Market Hall in one of those accidental ways. So it wasn't particularly planned. And I think that's one of the things I would also say, that sometimes the best things they just come. So you sort of have to be ready. It's a long story, but it was basically because it was a big regeneration area. The developers couldn't develop the building. They asked the council to do it. There was a little bit of money on the table from Homes England. The council basically rang us up because we'd converted a building up the road and said, we don't want to do this unless you've got a purpose for this building. That coincided with a lot of work we were doing with Plymouth University, who have an international specialism in digital art and technology. And I have been to places in Canada where, Plymouth is like, oh, yeah, you're from Plymouth. You walk down the road in Plymouth, and do Plymouthians know that we have an international specialism in digital art and technology? Well, they might be beginning to get an inkling now, but they certainly didn't when we started this 8 years ago. So that notion of we need to do something which takes a specialism that the city has, but finds a new way to open it up, create a cluster, create the support for new creatives coming through, retain graduates, all the stuff that we all want to do. And so I suppose at that moment you sort of go, okay, so building, bit of money, enough money to get at least start the idea, a really interesting purpose, a really interesting opportunity that potentially could be transformational. Okay, there's something to build on. CDF arrived when we were probably about 3 years through the capital project, and so it became a part of the anchor in the conversations about the partnership that underpins CDF in Plymouth, which involves the university, involves Arts University Plymouth. They've now become an Arts University. They've changed, but they're great. Old. No, they're great. And the City Council, and then Creative UK. So interestingly, the Creative UK person then has ended up working at Production Park, so there's lots of fantastic synergies going on, and Crowdfunder. And so what we did in our partnership was to say, we've got all these elements that underpin a creative ecology. How can we use CDF to create that investment? And we did definitely think of it as a revenue investment in order to start building some of the types of activities that sort of underpin that. It included big light festivals, it included all sorts of other stuff. I'm really pleased to see those tentacles. We had those tentacles down in Plymouth for a while as well.
But I mean, the tentacles are quite a good metaphor, really, because it sounds like what you're doing is taking those ingredients and weaving, and that's what the revenue funding is for, is the weaving, right? And we've talked about that, Emma, as well, in Creative Estuary. It's the keeping track of all the different actors and all the different spaces and all the different potentials, and then massaging it all together. That's where the magic is, I think. And
also not seeing it as projects that finish. And I think that's one of the things that I would say has been probably one of the differences from Plymouth now and Plymouth 10 years ago, is that there is there is definitely a group of organisations, public, third sector, beginning to be private, bigger private sector, who are sort of all going, okay, this is an investment that we all need to make together. Yeah. And in straightforward, investment terms, isn't it? You invest because you can see where that might lead to return.
And also, I guess, delivery breeds confidence in partnership, right? So when you first form partnerships, you don't know each other very well, you don't know each other's ways of thinking, but once you've walked through the fire, like you're saying with your artist collaboration, once you've done one, you get four come because you're a strong team. David, talk us through some of the magic of the partnerships you put together, or your team put together.
I just do the admin.
And do pop your hands
I'm
up.
fortunate
And
that I've got a very, very ambitious and very brave and brilliant team of people, really. So my bit's the easy bit, really. I was talking at a previous event a little while ago, and I was asked to talk about public funding, and I made the point that it was a bit all Greek to me. So I started off by talking about Aristotle. Because I think there's nothing new in this world, and I would urge you. I'm only going to have a few minutes, so I'll just want to point you to things rather than rattle on myself. So I would urge you to look up Aristotle's Rhetorical triangle, because nothing is new in this world. It's all been done before, and the three things that I took from that piece of work was, first of all, tell compelling stories. Yeah. Okay. Adrian made reference to our city plan that we've refreshed. So, and I would ask you to question yourselves: are you doing these things, these three things? So, first of all, you have to tell compelling stories, not at a rush, not in response to a funding opportunity, but a long-term vision and set of ambitions for your place. Tell compelling stories. The second point is develop absolutely close relationships and partnerships. Are you doing that? How strong are they? Because you can't do those in response to a bid. If you try and do them in 6 months, it doesn't work. You have to woo people, amongst other things. And so develop really strong bonds, close partnerships. And the third element of the triangle, which is the point you made actually, which is the boring bit, which is your evidence. Where's your evidence base? The logos component is about evidence base, and the spreadsheets. Yeah. I've been involved in projects that have, and it comes back to this point about the capital versus the revenue. I would have agreed with you up until now that the capital bit was the easy bit, and the revenue bit was more difficult. But facing the construction inflation that we're facing at the moment seems to have rebalance those slightly, so I think that capital is equally as difficult. But on the revenue part, I'm fortunate enough to know a chap that was involved with Sam Wanamaker and the Globe Theatre in London, and so I met him recently to talk about what we're doing here. Because in addition to this project, we've got an art centre project that we're working on. And the very first thing he said to me was, "Where's your business plan?" And so that comes back to the logos bit as well. And you need to be really, really tough about asking difficult questions about the business plan. Does it work? And don't kid yourselves. Yeah. I was involved in a project. I've been doing this for too long, really, I suppose. For many years ago, I was involved in a project where the business plan said that in the first year, from a standing start, the community centre would receive more paying visitors than London Zoo. And this was in the Black Country. And the reason they reached a business plan conclusion of that nature was they looked at how much it was costing, they looked at what they thought they could get away with in terms of ticket prices, divided by one with the other and come up with a number. Yeah. And we had to be really challenging and say, this ain't gonna work. Yeah. Be really tough on yourselves and don't kid yourselves in terms of legacy or continuity of survival of the project. So those are my sort of stock responses from what I've learned over the last 2 or 3 years really with this project.
Very helpful. Thank you, David. Okay, a couple of
Sarah,
questions from the crowd.
question from Joe. Hi. How does she know my name?
Do you
my
want to
name badge, clearly.
If you introduce
I'm Joe
yourself,
Bradshaw. Hi. I'm a Claw Leadership Fellow at the moment. I'm interested, potentially from any of the panel actually, in how you, when you're developing your plans, think about the currently articulated needs of your local communities and balance those with future needs of both that community and externals, because I can see where that might appear in conflict at times anyway.
Yeah, Ben, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I guess for us really, there's an element at the start, and this came from the development work around the start of the CDF bid, is that kind of wide stakeholder engagement to kind of get a clear view. There's that balance, and I think David made a really good point there about, particularly on the capital development side of things, where I think this really comes to the fore. You need to build on really strong foundations, so that demand analysis is really important. You've got that projection forward in terms of strategy, so our economic strategy came into the fore when we're developing our programme, thinking about the skills strategy, so we're building on those foundations, but that wide engagement across the sector and beyond was really key for us to kind of get the wider perspective and get that buy-in in terms of where we were heading. It's a constantly evolving thing as well, and I think there's that balance really in terms of you have to build on strong foundations, but you also have to balance that with being really bold and ambitious. And actually, from a capital development point of view, that can juxtapose sometimes a little bit. And I think so it's really important to get that balance between the creative side and the kind of the engaging side, listening to all those views, but bringing that back into what David was talking about, of that challenging environment of saying, actually, will this work? And actually, when are the times we're going to be able to do that right at the start of the programme and at set points? Because on a capital development point of view, you don't want to be changing your mind about what you're doing at REBA stage 3, where you're sort of doing very detailed design work. So it's about being very open, but trying to front end as much as you can around that engagement, so you're not playing catch up later on in the programme.
Yeah, I think there's something also about getting decent advice early to make sure that you get to the right REBA stage 3, isn't it? And I think sometimes the difficulty is not having enough money early in a project to get that quality advice and do that quality thinking, and we kind of tend to rush things a little too much.
I think it comes back to that point of being able to programme at the start of the development as well, because I keep going back to that point of there's nothing like showing people and involving people in activity. You can show people plans, you can show people numbers, but actually living and feeling that is the best way to get that feedback and that understanding of, is this where we should go? So yeah, I think it's that balance is key.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm David Lockwood from the Arts Development Company in Dorset. I'm thinking about high street development, particularly town centre development, and the fact that lots of properties in town centres are owned privately and often with shareholders who are offshore, and that government money, in my experience, is used for those sorts of developments, sometimes in terms of cultural development, and that as a consequence, the owners of those properties are sometimes waiting, kind of expecting that at some point the government's going to come in and give them some millions for that development. Is there anything, first of all, is that just a problem we've just got to kind of live with within our society? Or is there something that we can do about it? And if there is, what can we do about that?
Well, I mean, I've got kind of a development trust association kind of response to that, in terms of, I think that one of the biggest things we can be doing is mapping ownership and looking at where there are things that we can bring into either public or community ownership. And we've done some work with Creative Estuary where we've taken 6 town centres or city centres in some cases and mapped the ownership. And it's very interesting actually how much is still in public ownership. And it's a lot more than you might realise. But that's not to pretend that there isn't a problem, that lots of things are owned by people in the same way that they might trade peanuts. They're trading income for buildings, and that's our high street. So I've done the awful thing, haven't I, of going, that's my favourite question, here's my answer. But I think there's, some of the things we've then been doing at Creative Estuary, we then rounded up councils who had some of the same types of asset class available. So like you guys could have talked to each other about market halls and how we do that. We've been looking at shopping centres and car parks. So I think it's then about what are the common types of typologies on the high streets in terms of that might be in public ownership, and where might we be able to unlock that, particularly as people are moving council-run services away from being physical things to being virtual things. We've done a 7-storey office block in Barking that was this council's offices and is now a big, huge creative community hub. It's only on a 7-year timeline now, but that proves the case to then get it, rather than knock it down or sell it like they were going to. We convinced them, here's the maths, here's the story. You want to build jobs, creative jobs last for the whole, they're full season jobs. Give it a go for 7 years. If it works, when you develop this whole site, you can build this in as a permanent part of the programme. And hopefully that then, the evidence becomes the temporary project, if that makes sense. Then the business plan works. So that's kind of my 10 cents.
Can I give a view on this?
Yeah.
I think we've suffered similar things to what you're alluding to. I think one of the issues is as soon as a private landlord sees the council, the numbers just get silly. They think we were either born yesterday or have got more money than sense, as it were. So I think my answer to your question would be to develop options in terms of, so you've got some choices, and then pick your battles. Don't be afraid to walk away. So we've had opportunities where it ain't going to work, and I'm not going to go down the CPO route. So I've decided that we'll walk away because we've developed other opportunities that we wish to pursue, and just say no, as it were. And I think the other point is that then, when I say pick your battles, know which are the things that are absolutely critical to the delivery of the outcomes that you desire, and which things are nice to have, frankly, but not absolutely critical, because we've got another property that we now own where we were not afraid to play out with our councillors CPO message, so that the owner was very serious, knew that we were very serious, and that would be the ultimate thing we did. And in the end, we acquired that particular property because it was absolutely critical to what we were trying to do as an anchor unit. He got his pound of flesh, but we got our property. So I would say develop options, don't be afraid to walk away, and know which are your absolute must deliverables, and some things that are nice to do but not critical.
Yeah, so I suppose my response to that would be, I think it's about how we, in places, develop the right sort of partnerships and ecology. In Plymouth now, there is pretty much every form of sort of repurposing of old space going on, and some of that's being done by the council, some of it's absolutely not, some of it's being done by a whole raft of different types of social enterprises, community benefit, land trusts, all of that type of thing, community share ownership, meanwhile use, on it goes. But I think I suppose two things I think have changed probably in the last 10 years. One of which is that a few projects being bold has given confidence to other people, and that's really important. So that sort of belief that you could do something, and that you also don't have to know for certain what it's going to be in the future. So I suppose one of the things we learnt very early on in the process is actually doesn't matter what you think or what you think the purpose of your building is going to be, it will evolve and it will change. So, probably the biggest advice I would give is build it as flexibly as possible so that it can change and can evolve as it needs to. The other thing I would also say, sorry, this is a bit technical, is particularly if you're in a residential space, put in really good soundproofing. Anything else you do, just make sure the soundproofing works. But, leaving that bit aside, but what has also happened is that because we have a strong partnership, which is an ecology, it therefore means that the different roles that the council can play versus, a variety of independent organisations is something that I think we as a city now are quite good at flexing. So there are some projects which the council leads, there are some projects which other people leads, there are projects where, you know, it needs to be the right sort of mix. There are some where everybody goes, yeah, it's only going to be for a few months, that's really cool. There are some where it's like, no, actually we're going to try and make this be something that, you know, changes for a long time. And having that sort of confidence to create that space. One of the best things that's happening now in Plymouth, certainly in the last couple of years, is that we really have got lots of sort of 20-somethings, early 30-somethings who are all coming up. You know, there are all sorts of collectives of this, that and the other. They're all coming up with ideas. They're all wanting to be part of it and to lead it. None of them really have got business models that are going to stack up in the sense of taking on something forever, but they absolutely have brilliant energy, and you know, we want them to be part of it. So it's how do you sort of, you know, enable that, keep that sort of energy, and then have the sort of, I suppose it's the infrastructure of partnerships underneath it that can really work with that in that very ecological model. And you know, I'm very I have no idea whether having an immersive dome is going to be the right thing in 10 years' time. In some ways, I sort of hope it isn't, because the way we've built it is it's a space which means if it's not domes anymore and it's something else, cool, that's really fine. But it's disruptive for now, and that's really important. Yeah. And I absolutely know somebody will come in with another disruptive idea soon, and great, off we go.
Jump in, Annabel, and then we've got really two more questions, yes, and I'll wrap things up.
I'm amazed to say I've actually got a building now on the docks in Grimsby. I've taken it on for 3 years. It stinks of fish. The asbestos has been removed, and I've even got a flushing toilet. So, as always, artists are often the answer. So it is this kind of almost like the regentrification of Grimsby docks. Who would have imagined that? So I am actually literally battling Netflix now to kind of get access to space and things. But it's that really interesting kind of slightly difficult relationship that you have with a private company or Associated British Ports. Maybe edit that out, I don't know. But it's like a case of like the second I leave the threshold of my studio space, I'm not allowed to take photographs. And for a visual artist and filmmaker, that's a really strange and awkward relationship. But it's like ironing these things out. So I mean, my building is beautiful. It's got everything I need. It's got a massive door. It's double height. It's an old bank. And it just really works. And I think without having the experience we talked about earlier and having that confidence, I've literally just put my money where my mouth is. I put 3 years down and said, let's give it a go. Yeah. And I think, you know, and there are things happening there. You know, there's exhibitions from the old sort of YBAs. There's all sorts of things that you would never have dreamt of. So the days running away to Plymouth, then coming back to Grimsby via Hull, it all works out, and having those relationships with. So I think it's a great way of using space.
Yeah. I think that's a really fantastic outcome of funding, isn't it? Is funding gives confidence, and that confidence makes things go by themselves without necessarily that grant funding the next time. You're kind of jumping in. Okay, we've got two questions, one at the back, one at the front, and then I think Jason's going to kick me off. Keep the morning going. Yep.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sara and I'm from the West Midlands Combined Authority. I have a quite specific question about local authorities. I'd be really interested in hearing a little bit of thoughts about the process around that. About 6 months ago, I actually organised a study trip to the Stockport CDF project. I don't know if there's anyone from Stockport in here. Oh, hello. And there was some really good feedback in how together the local authority was, the different departments, the regeneration department, the economy, communities, etc. And sometimes I guess there is a challenge that people think this just as a capital project, but I'd be really interested in hearing in how, within your local authorities, you've kind of done that coming together bit in terms of involving everyone, and particularly if there's been any challenges and how you've kind of overcome those challenges.
Yeah, thank you. Let's take the second question as well. So kind of everyone get your brains working on partnerships within the council, because I think, And then Emma? Yep. While everyone watches you.
Hi, Emma Wilcox from Creative Estuary. We agreed that we'd ask some difficult questions today, so I'm going to ask the first one, I think, which is CDF Round 1 has been fantastic in that mix of revenue and capital. And you've all talked about the best practice, which is developing partnerships, showing use of those spaces, and that's been enabled through revenue. The future policy looks different, which is heavily capital. So how are we going to do those really well?
Okay. Ben, do you want to kick off and see if you can cover both?
Yeah.
And everyone else have a little breast?
Partnerships-wise, within the council, actually was relatively because councils are always big complicated beasts, but relatively easy for us in that we had our chief executive directly involved in the development of the bid, and that really helped in terms of kind of giving it the elevation and that discussion at kind of senior levels across the council. And also that engagement, we sometimes forget to engage across internal partners sometimes, so we're all busy chasing off sector engagement when we're developing a bid, making sure you engage people internally. So for example, a very practical example of that is where are we going to develop our creative hub in the Wakefield City, ensuring that our property colleagues, wider highways colleagues, other people are involved in the site selection process, so we have a combined view of actually what is the right thing to do, what is the right intervention, has been key. And I guess internal and external partnerships is probably the same answer for us in terms of making sure we have clear programme boards, clear lines of communication in terms of driving the project forward. So it does really come back to, for me, getting that buy-in at a senior level and making sure this is seen as a major priority for the authority, and therefore different components of the authority lend their support, but also doing that at a partnership level as well, and doing that right from the start, rather than, hey guys, we've got a great idea, we've got some funding, we're 6 months down the line and now we need your help, which does happen quite often. The hard question. So, I can't give you a definitive answer. What I can do is say from the perspective of our programme, it would have been a lot more difficult if we had not had the revenue. It has been fundamental, the programming, far more eloquently described by colleagues on the panel today about what that means from an artist perspective and a programming perspective. But from us in terms of developing the capital build, being able to programme during the early part of the development and use the feedback we got from the public, but also from artists and creatives to inform the development has been vital. Now, if the programme didn't have that revenue funding, we would need to try and find other ways of doing that. But I think for us, it was a really, really important part of being able to get to where we are now.
That might be the sad truth, that it might just be much harder without that ongoing revenue funding. David, do you think of any ways we can unlock hope in the room? And not finish on
dear
down?
me, no. Yes, I mean I'm involved picking up this point about from the top, as it were. Our leadership team, including me, are very, very heavily involved in all of the projects, whether it's this, whether it's town fund, whether it's anything else. So we're a small local authority. We're all very hands-on, and I think that probably helps, even though I do interfere a little bit too much, I'm sure. But that senior leadership really helps, and working closely with the members obviously really helps as well, so that we have a shared view of what we're doing. With regard to, very, very quickly, with regard to the revenue question, that's really, really difficult because, we were successful with round one of Cultural Development Fund, and our partners put on a wonderful series of light nights and festivals, which really helped. And it helped in a certain way because some of the capital projects, in the early days, people think nothing's happening. And one of the challenges on capital projects for me is you announce it, and then you spend months and months doing the paperwork, all the legals, all of the leases, all of that sort of stuff, and people start to get fidgety, and and you've announced this and you're doing bugger all is the phrase. Well, actually we're not. We're doing really, really lots of grinding work that it doesn't have any public profile. So having the revenue component to take things along during those very early days was really important, I think, to maintain the momentum and maintain the relationship with partners. But I think the other projects that we're involved in around town fund, for example, where there isn't the revenue, it's really, really hard. Really, really, really difficult. And we are stymied almost at every turn with the fact that we don't have any revenue to get things doing. And we don't even have any revenue to as sort of, initial start-up seed corn funding to get things going in the early days. Yeah. So I don't know the answer, really. I think the answer is a plea back from all of us to government to say, you know what, you need to look at a revenue funding really as part of this. We've got UK SPF now, and it's fortunate. It almost sounds joined up, but I wouldn't go that far, that, we've got UK SPF within our bailiwick, as it were. So we are trying to use UK SPF to match into some of our capital activities, which is really good and helps, but programs that are almost entirely capital are just really, really, really challenging, and we need to send that message back, I think.
They're probably why so in my projects, this is a workaround. I kind of have a third column, so I have revenue, capital, and capitalisable, which is code for actual revenue, but I'm going to tell you I'm spending it on capital. Don't tell anyone, whoever funded me that. Oh no, they're all in the room. But they knew because I told them. And essentially, what I try to do is then say, okay, anything that's helping me get an asset or design an asset is going to be capitalised once I have an asset. So I call that capitalisable. And I think your revenue programmes that are about engaging people with what the building might look like, with co-designing, with all of those touch points, if you're kind of creative, then you might be able to call that capitalisable. But I do think you're right. It'd be better if government listened, probably. I'm sure he's listening through the video. After he did the video, he probably stayed on just to listen and learn.
One lives in hope.
Yeah. Okay, so on that note, if that's okay with everybody, I'll kind of bring us to an end. Is that cool, or have we got a little bit more time? Have we got 5 whole minutes? Brilliant. Wow. I thought it'd be indiscreet to look at my watch, so I've been trying to judge from your facial expression.
Sarah?
So in that case, I'll just check if there's any more hands. We've got one here, and then you're scratching your chin at the back there, sir? No, that's not a question. Anything else? No.
Oh, it's bidding on an artwork then.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Like, get in.
Yeah, get in. 60 million.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Hi, Abby Gilmore. Is it on? Yeah. Abby Gilmore, University of Manchester. I want to ask the kind of theoretical, critical question about gentrification and how you mitigate against that for these projects and how it's come into your thinking. Specifically around, displacing communities, or also whether or not communities that are outside of the areas where you're developing capital projects, how they benefit. And also the question about artists and whether, in that kind of classic Sharon Zukin type approach where the artist is the first to get displaced as rents go up. Mm-hmm. So how has that factored into your thinking? Thanks.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Any last call for questions? There's one, the gentleman with a gilet. Gilet? Do we call it a gilet?
Hi, thanks. Jabariaz Worcester. My question to any of the panelists is what are your biggest learnings and challenges out of this process, and how constrained were you by the image that you'd kind of set yourselves? For example, Worcester, we kind of our strapline is about building on 2,000 years of history, and historically we've been about the Civil War, and that's our cultural offer. And how have you broken that mould? Okay, great. So 2 questions there. One about history and how that feeds into or might work against the image that we're cultivating going forwards. And then the other one about gentrification, so about who's in the tent of being looked after by these projects and who might get left behind and how we can manage that. You're doing a lot of nodding, Annabel. Does that mean I can come to you first?
I'll talk nonsense, but I always do anyway. Let's turn it into artwork. But yeah, I think it's so important, isn't it? Because, I mean, I was incredibly mindful that one of my big gripes about Grimsby is why does everything have to be about fish? Yeah. You know? And I've made a piece of work called Expletive Fish. There's some alliteration there, you will get what I'm talking about. But it's one of those, it's so important, isn't it? Because I was like, I mean, I really want to place on the docks, but I don't want to be painting pictures of trawlers. I can't paint anyway, I shouldn't admit to that, should I? But it's one of those, and it's so important that I don't want to go in there with the intention of upsetting the community that's there. And it has an incredibly rich history and it's very important. And I think it's how you can, and equally, I don't want to be priced out of my beautiful new studio on the docks because I'm already incredibly mindful. So I got it written into a clause. I just basically said, I want this for 3 years. I don't want a price hike going on. And I'm literally, my contract doesn't start until I can flush that toilet you promised me. I know I keep going on about this, but it's like you have to look after your artists. Because at the end of the day, what's the point having all of this? If you don't look after artists and communities communities of artists and everybody else, what's the point of doing it? So I think you have to approach that with, like you say, with a kind of almost a reverence as such, but a respect, especially in terms of the subject matter, but then be incredibly challenging in the work you do. And don't expect your audience, don't dumb things down with this weird expectation of that's all they understand in the arts, because that's absolute nonsense, isn't it? People can have a very sophisticated idea of what they want, what they like, and it's not for us to actually say what that is. So I think you have to be very open about that stuff and bring people in from the very beginning, which is what we're talking about. Again, with artists and architects. You know, we've all got a great skill set, but why impose something on a community if they don't want it, if they don't use it? And I remember my old days as a filmmaker, made a documentary in a really small Lincolnshire village and interviewed a bunch of kids and said, thanks so much for the basketball, which absolutely, you know, thank you, council, it's really kind of you, but none of us play basketball. Why have you put this here? And I think if we take this similar approach of what you're doing here, that's the way to go about it. And I am making a piece of work about a fishing net, but it's a carbon capturing fishing net using kind of, you know, new materials and technology. So I think there are ways of bringing these things together.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Lindsey, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's a journey, isn't it, that you sort of bring everybody into. And I mean, certainly our experience in Devonport was, I mean, people said to us very early on, we don't just want sort of good enough for Devonport. We want something which is really brilliant. And the history of Devonport is really interesting because it was incredibly prosperous up until the Second World War, massive bombing. Then it became, you know, bottom 10% of indices and multiple deprivation. And for them, for the community, that sense of being part of something which evolved. And so I suppose in terms of the space and the tools, it's really a sort of about saying, okay, well, it's here, it's yours, but it's also yours in a, not just in a way which, so one of the histories of Devonport is it had more community centres than you could throw a stick at. And actually, because there'd been a bit of a policy of every part of the community needs its community centre, and they had become quite fractious fiefdoms that were very cliquey. And so there was a sort of sense of how could you create a space which didn't do that, which really allowed for that flow. So that's sort of been something we're doing. I suppose what I wanted to sort of reflect, and certainly how do you make sure that local people are part of it? You know, the first people who have used the building, did use the building, were the local community. You know, there are really active stages. We have projects going on in local schools. The local schools are the biggest users. You know, there are lots of things that you can do to make sure that it is, it's a sort of interesting space, but equally you don't have to use structures which sort of can become quite exclusive. So it's sort of that, I suppose, is what I feel is a really interesting place to be. The bit I wanted to say, I suppose, going back to the previous one, and it's a bit reflecting on Emma's question, was for us, and I think probably for all our places, CDF has been really important, but it has come as part of a big journey. And it's your point, David. At the end of the day, it wouldn't have worked if the partnerships weren't already in place. And so what we're talking about in Plymouth, and Nina from Plymouth City Council's here, is, you know, a long-term commitment from not just the council or the cultural sector or, you know, the community sector or anyone else, social enterprise sector, you know, which is about saying how does, want a better phrase, culture-led regeneration, how does that underpin where we want Plymouth to be? And CDF was brilliant because it arrived at just the right moment and it allowed us to do a bunch of stuff. If it hadn't been CDF, we'd have found another way. And I think that's probably what I want to say more than anything. It's actually having the creative confidence as a place to duck and dive. You know, the Market Hall Capital came out of a really weird mix of stuff. We could have put some of that in as revenue. It was things like unlocking growth and ERDF and all of that. We could have changed the balance. Yeah. More revenue, less capital if we'd have needed to done, if the capital came from somewhere else. So I think we have to have faith in our creative ability as places to sort of make the stuff work. Yeah. So it'd be lovely if government listened and did what they should. Probably don't want to record any of this, but, you know, the level of incompetence that we have in government at the moment, I have no belief that they'll do anything sensible. So I think it's, you know, it sticks with us as local places to go, come on, we can do this. We just have to sort of work our way to do it. And if you've got strong partnerships, you've got a strong vision, you've got a good ecology, you're going to get there. And, you know, it's good to work with partners who know what they're doing, but in the end, we'll sort of make it work. So I just think we have to not get downtrodden by that.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. There's another hand has snuck up. Have we got time for one last one? One more. It's like the encore. Yeah, no, it was you.
Sorry. We'll talk really brilliantly about involving local communities. And I know we're in an artsy space, but I wanted to ask about numbers. When you talk about involving a community and getting lots of voices on board, if you've got 1 million people in your town, how many of them have you engaged with to have done community engagement successfully?
Can I take that to you, Ben?
Do you want me to throw? I mean, we've got a population of about 350,000 across the district. When we've done pop-up activity at the Market Hall, for example, and used that as an engagement opportunity, about 10% of that population in terms of visitor numbers. So you're never going to hit everybody, but at different times and by doing different things, you hope to reach out as much as you possibly can. As a council as well, we're blessed with things like libraries. We have a library in every single community day. It gives us a foothold into engaging people in a different way as well. So it's kind of thinking a bit differently about how you reach out to people and not doing that from a very top-down kind of way, thinking about the assets and the connections that you already have. Other simple examples is we've got a network of community anchors that aren't delivered by the council, very much community-run facilities, using our skills programme to go and work with those people and use that as an opportunity to engage those communities about what might happen at the Market Hall and at the Wakefield Exchange in the future, but also how that can reach out into communities. So it's a bit of a mixed-use kind of portfolio of ways of doing it, but from a local authority perspective, we're blessed with those opportunities. It's about thinking about what we can do across the whole of the authority.
Yeah. So I think if that's okay, I'm going to wrap things up and just say thank you very much to our panellists. You know, David, you've really talked about boldness of vision and specific buildings that you would fight for in order to unlock the ability to deliver that vision. Ben, you've been fantastic in talking about really detail-orientated facts that make the case for your thing, but then just making sure you're doing delivery. While you're squirreling away in the background, you're also making sure that people know and understand the project. Annabel, you've blown our minds with F-Fish. You know, you've been really fantastic in how you see the world and how your art has related to the place you're from, but also how you've been able to explain to us how these projects really make a difference and how the legacy of them. Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you. And Lindsey, thank you so much for unpacking everything you've done in Plymouth and for reminding us about that boldness of vision and purpose that sat on top of a good spreadsheet. And I think that's our how-to on capital projects. So thank you very much, everybody.